Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love. Let's get to it. One of the oldest tricks in the con man's repertoire is the bait and switch. Offer the customer or sucker one thing, but supply something different and inferior. There's arguably never before been a more audacious and more sinister example of this type of sleight of hand than the one currently being perpetrated by the Democratic Party and its presidential ticket. Specifically, the American people are being asked to vote for Joe Biden for president and Kamala Harris as his vice presidential running mate. But frankly, there's no chance, none, that if the Biden-Harris team actually wins the upcoming election, the former vice president will actually serve as president for any significant time. Think about it. Joe Biden appears physically unfit to serve in one of the most demanding jobs in the world. The man is now notorious for declaring a lid or end to campaigning at 9 a.m. and in recent days for not campaigning at all for 5 out of 6 of them. Then there's the question of Mr. Biden's judgment. One of his colleagues during the Obama-Biden administration, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, said that Joe Biden, quote, has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades, unquote. Perhaps most alarming of all, we've learned in the past week that Joe Biden's family has been involved in extensive corruption, including with such enemies as Russia and China. The evidence suggests that the vice president personally profited from at least some of these transactions. As Judicial Watch lead investigator Chris Farrell, a veteran counterintelligence practitioner, told me yesterday, such misconduct, even by family members or associates, is extremely problematic. Here's how he put it.
No ordinary citizen would ever be able to obtain a clearance or access to classified information, given this outrageous string, just the emails we've seen, let alone all the details and background and meeting and influence peddling and political leverage. And these are all disqualifiers right from the start.
It's therefore no small irony that Joe Biden chose to make a centerpiece of his closing pitch for the presidency in last night's debate this extraordinary statement.
You know who I am. You know who he is. You know his character. You know my character. You know our reputations for honor and telling the truth. I am anxious to have this race. I am anxious to see this take place. The character of the country is on the ballot. Our character is on the ballot. Look at us closely.
President Trump immediately and correctly pointed out that the information discovered on Hunter Biden's, as he put it, laptop from hell, established his father's character to be that of a corrupt politician, not the man of character, honor, and integrity the former Veep professes to be. Taken together, it's clear that Joe Biden is a disastrous liability for the Democrats and will be pushed aside at the earliest opportunity. Nancy Pelosi's recent proposal to modify the 25th Amendment so as to allow a panel to be charged with evaluating and removing a president if its members deem the chief executive to be incapacitated transparently is meant to facilitate such a coup against the former vice president. That's especially so since in the course of the endgame of this presidential race, Mr. Biden has renounced many of the concessions he made to the radical leftists that now dominate his party, including those he explicitly embraced in his platform. Once they have one of their own in the vice presidency, you can bet that Joe Biden will have outlived his usefulness to the radical left and will be swiftly supplanted. Consequently, the prospect that Kamala Harris might become president at any point, let alone that she may be in that role early on, should be a central focus of what is left of this election cycle. President Trump has accurately described Senator Harris as a communist. Others have rated her as the most liberal member of the U.S. Senate, surpassing even Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. and her commitment to the extremist policies of the Green New Dealers, the advocates of socialized medicine, Black Lives Matter revolutionaries, and her party's other fundamental transformers, make Kamala Harris unelectable, as was demonstrated by her dismal performance in the run-up even to the leftist-dominated Democrats' primaries. In short, the bait and switch underway at the moment is the only way Senator Harris could ever expect to become president and then be in a position faithfully to implement the socialist takedown of our constitutional republic to which she seems committed. So the question to the Democratic Party leadership is this: are you going to level with the American people now and make Kamala Harris the presidential nominee, exposing her radical leftist record and predilections to the scrutiny they urgently require? For example, will we get forthwith some clarity on Kamala Harris's Marxist pedigree and her associations, her policy towards the greatest existential threat of our time, the Marxist-Maoist Chinese Communist Party, or her support for censoring, canceling, and controlling her critics? All of these are ominous, and we have a need to know what she's about now. Or, for Democratic leaders, are you going to try to pull off the ultimate con so as to impose such a candidate and her, frankly, anti-American agenda on a bait-and-switched country? Again, we need to know, and we need to know now. Those are my thoughts. I hope you'll share with me yours and learn how you can help at our new website, securingamerica.tv. It's a resource for not only the various segments of this program every day, but it also will allow you to tap into a host of other resources and work that I think you'll find fascinating. Also, please follow me at Frank Gaffney on Twitter. Next, we'll talk with Sam Faddis, former CIA operative, right after this. Welcome back. I'm very pleased to be joined by one of our regulars here at Securing America, Charles Sam Faddis. Sam has served his country in a number of capacities, including as an Army officer and a clandestine service officer for the CIA. He is the author of a number of fiction and nonfiction books, including among the latter, Beyond Repair, The Rise and Fall of the CIA. He's the driving force behind andmagazine.com, a terrific resource, and you can follow him on Twitter at Real Sam Faddis. Sam, thanks so much for joining us once again. Good to have you here.
Great to be here, Frank.
I want to talk to you about a couple of things, several of which you've been focused on like a laser at andmagazine.com, Sam, but I think one that hasn't been written up yet is worth real close scrutiny. Talk to us about this evident cooking of the books of the intelligence community to make an intelligence assessment that found, we were told, the entire community agrees, the Russians interfered in our 2016 election, and Donald Trump, in some form or fashion, was engaged in that activity. Collusion is the term that came to be used for it. What do we know now about that document and its actual support within the IC?
What we know is consistent with everything else we know about that entire ludicrous story, which is we were lied to. What we were presented with was the claim that the community as a whole had gone out and done this thorough assessment that would typically involve working level people and all sorts of drafts of the assessment, and finally be accepted as the gospel, if you will. And in fact, that is not at all what happened. A handful of individuals, Comey and Brennan and so forth, Clapper, penned the thing themselves, accepted no criticism or input, and then presented it falsely as the assessment of the entire IC. It was we were lied to in the most direct terms.
Yeah, it was a fraud perpetrated on the American people, and another example of the kind of weaponization, not just politicization, weaponization of the intelligence agencies of this country during the Obama-Biden administration. Sam, speaking of the Obama-Biden administration, one of the stories you have featured prominently, and I gather one of our colleagues on the Committee on the Present Danger China, John Mills, was the source for it, involved the conduct, again, misconduct is a better characterization, of the intelligence and other agencies of the United States government at the end of the Obama-Biden administration. Talk about what John has revealed.
Well, what John has told us, and I should add that he is a senior, highly respected individual who was in a position where he had complete access to this information at the time. The most salient thing he's told us
as a U.S. government employee during that period.
He was sitting in the Pentagon in a senior position and got all of this information directly through official channels at the time. Because, if I may,
he was actually enlisted to help with the undertaking, no?
He was directed to be part of a committee stood up at the White House, which would steer the narrative for the Russian collusion hoax, and probably most flagrantly, most sensationally, I guess, the thing that takes your breath away, I guess is what I'm looking for, is that part of that committee's charter was to consider whether they were actually even going to proceed with the inauguration. Was specifically planned for the possibility of not transferring power to Donald Trump as scheduled and as required by the Constitution.
Yes, stunning. Absolutely stunning. And these are some of the same people we're hearing talking about Donald Trump not being willing to allow a peaceful transfer of power, should he lose, in the upcoming election. It's doubly scandalous as a result. Let me turn to another topic that you have also been focused on at andmagazine.com, Sam Faddis, that is much in the news at the moment. We're hearing from the intelligence community and notably the FBI, Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe, that the Iranians as well as the Russians, are now trying to influence our elections. It certainly sounds very familiar. To this point, we've not heard them suggest that Donald Trump is responsible for that, but or colluding with either party, improbable as that now seems, of course. But what's actually going on here, Sam? Are these the most serious threats to the integrity of our election as you see it, or might there be others that are even more ominous, operating from offshore?
Yeah, I think a magician would call this principle misdirection, right? Look over here while what you really should be looking at is happening right in front of you. We're supposed to be worried about the Iranians spamming us. Meanwhile, there is a massive story the media is ignoring, which suggests strongly that we ought to be worried about the fact that Joe Biden has been, for a number of years, bought and paid for by the Communist Chinese Party. So we're about one step away from having a guy that works for Beijing sit down in the Oval Office. But we don't want to talk about that because those Iranian spam emails are the real danger.
Yeah. And Sam, I just have to say, as you look at what the Chinese are up to on a massive scale in terms of trying to take down Donald Trump. I mean, they don't even feign an interest of impartiality, let alone refraining from interfering with our internal affairs. They are all about denying him re-election, and whether that's the COVID-19 escapade, I believe, or the plays on our economy that they're continuing to engage in, or actual interference with revolutionaries tied to the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, in our streets. These guys are all about it, and it's just bizarre that we're not allowed to talk about it. And it turns out that the social media platforms, as well as the mainstream media, seem to be suppressing actively any conversation we do try to have. Very quickly, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it happens to us even at And Magazine all of the time that we find ourselves literally suppressed, shadow banned, shut down. We're not allowed to talk about it. This is a guy, Biden, who is very likely completely compromised by the Chinese Communist Party, one step away from sitting down in the Oval Office. We can't discuss it.
Can't discuss it, can't think about it, can't assess what its implications are. This is a scandal. Sam Faddis, thanks for what you're doing at And America and AndMagazine.com. Come back to us next week with more. Next up, Assistant Secretary of State Robert Schwartz. And I'm thrilled to be able to say we have another of our regulars here at Securing America with us, former Assistant Secretary of State Robert Charles. He's a former Naval Intelligence Officer and staff member in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush White Houses. These days, he's the spokesman for a terrific organization, the Association of Mature American Citizens. You can follow his work there at amac.us. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to the show. It's good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, Frank.
I wanted to pick up on something that I think you published at amac.us that really caught my eye because it's seemingly part of a problem that we touched on in the previous segment with Sam Faddis. Namely, we're not getting the straight skinny about what's going on in our country as a result of either deep state operations in the government or what some in the media and the social media are doing to censor information, keep it from us. Specifically, talk about the fact that there is ongoing violence taking place in our country in a number of cities, I believe, and that's just not being reported. What is up with that, Bobby?
Well, you make a very good point, Frank. You know, in order for a democracy to work, you have to have an informed citizenry. They have to get the whole picture, not just a little teeny piece of the picture. Right. And they need to know what's really happening. And of course, we've had both the major mainstream media and social media, in many ways, disserving us by not providing the entire picture. And what you're pointing to is a couple of pieces that are up on amac.us that I wrote this week, saying, in effect, that we have violence occurring, rolling violence occurring around the country right now. It occurs at various levels, at various in just dozens of cities. Wow. It's been ongoing here for more than 90 days. The media has largely ignored it, and I think the reason for that is that it was originally fanned, if you will, by organizations thinking that they would blame it all on President Trump, and that didn't work. I would like to believe that people aren't blaming COVID on President Trump either, and so their strategy is sort of bottomed out. And so the secondary strategy is just don't report it. Yeah. The problem is that it still happens.
Keep it going because it's going to be useful to the post-election period, as we'll be talking about, I think, with Hans von Spakovsky and Christian Adams shortly. But here's the kicker, isn't it, Bobby, that if you don't report on it, because when you did report on it massively, around the clock it seemed, early on, it blew back on the Democratic Party that was tolerating it and in some cases actually encouraging it. And what we're now seeing is they're not allowing people to be aware that something that is unpopular, that would actually be detrimental to both presumably the Biden-Harris ticket and down ballot, will not be brought to the attention of the electorate in a way that would inform that voting. This is, I mean, I gotta say, scandalous. It's clearly impacting the choice that we know needs to be made. But it's of a piece, too, with how they were treating the Hunter Biden laptop and what we've learned from that. Talk a little bit about your insights into that as a former senior government official and naval intelligence officer. Bobby?
Well, to me, I mean, Frank, everything I see on the public record, it looks to me like the kind of public corruption that we have worked ceaselessly around the world to try to prevent in other countries, and it's come home now. And I think what's remarkable to me is that the data that's coming out is very hard to deny. The emails, the written documents, the indications are that Joe Biden was very deeply involved in all of this. It's disturbing, and I guess I would say that it says several things to me. First, the most important aspect of a presidency is, I think, honesty and integrity. The next might be judgment. And I think that this is a vice president who, for his age and other reasons, only add to this, that does not have good judgment. He does not have a good ethical compass. We know that all the way back to his law school days when he was actually almost kicked out for ethics violations and plagiarism. We've seen it all the way through his career, and now we see indications in this laptop that he has actually been on the take when it comes to China, Romania, Ukraine, and it's very disturbing because what it does is it sows huge seeds of doubt about what would happen if he were there. There's no way he could hold China accountable. It presents to me a security threat in the sense that he becomes a security risk. I don't know how you give someone like that a security clearance. He's denied all these things, but the data is right there, and they have it on him. And it apparently there are photographs on that laptop. So it's very disturbing as a matter of both judgment and ethics.
Well, and fundamentally, the confidence that the American people can repose in such an individual as commander-in-chief to actually be putting America first, to coin a phrase. And I wanted to ask you about this China business, Bobby. You mentioned your own work in the State Department, helping countries around the world cultivate the rule of law and practice it and otherwise nurture the freedoms that it makes possible. But I wanted to ask you about one of the few things, I have to say, that came out of this so-called foreign policy presidential debate, which was mostly about everything else, namely Joe Biden's assertion that if he were president, he would make China play by the rules. You've expressed a little skepticism about that already, but tease that out for us. What would a Biden presidency vis-a-vis China look like, knowing what we do about how seemingly seriously compromised he and his family are by the Chinese?
So I would say that there are two elements to that question, Frank, and they're both important. The first has to do with being compromised, and you're right. When someone is compromised, that foreign country, then, and we're on guard for this all over the place, both at the State Department, at the Defense Department, and in the intelligence community. If someone is compromised, then they are now basically under the control of that foreign country, right. And that's deeply disturbing as a matter of judgment, ethics, integrity, risk to the national security of the United States. The bigger question is whether there's really any intent in the part of Joe Biden to keep China accountable, whether it's to the WTO, whether it's to the South China Seas, whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's what they might do to Taiwan. And the answer is that you have to look at the past in order to look at and understand the future.
It is predictive in this case.
Biden is
Bobby,
very clear.
We are hard out of time. That is the point. We know the man by his conduct to date, and it's not encouraging, or I think justifying of his getting a promotion. We'll talk with you again soon. Bobby Charles, thank you very much for your time. Next up, we'll speak with Larry Kudlow, the director of the U.S. National Economic Council, right after this. And I couldn't be more pleased to say a welcome to the show for the first time to an old friend and much admired colleague going back to our shared moments in the administration of Ronald Reagan. His name is Larry Kudlow, and he is the director of the United States National Economic Council. Mr. Director, welcome to Securing America. It's so good to have you with us.
Thank you, Frank. It's great to see you. Appreciate it.
I'm particularly appreciative of your time because I know it's much in demand at the moment to sort of do a little bit of a hot wash, as they say in the military, on what happened in the course of the debate last night between the president and Joe Biden.
Well, look, first of all, I think the president did himself a lot of good last evening.
I do too.
His temperament and demeanor, I'll just start with that, was very presidential. And I think he's going to win a lot of points on that. On substantive policy issues that you and I like to follow, I also think he did quite well. Now, unfortunately, there wasn't much on the economy, although the president did nail Biden towards the end on raising taxes and regulations, and contrasted that with the president's record of cutting both. But I'll tell you one thing. On energy, the president smoked Biden out, so we're not going to have any more oil. And then he's been flip-flopping on fracking. But here's the deal. No more oil means no more natural gas. Natural gas is a byproduct of oil drilling. And natural gas is the big winner so that we become energy independent. And it's a clean-burning fuel. And our carbon emissions have actually gone down. And, of course, getting rid of oil in the next 10 or 15 years and or natural gas would utterly destroy the economy, probably lose about 10% of GDP. Maybe talk about that a little later. He did very well on that. I also thought the president acquitted himself very well on his COVID management. The media is very critical of him, but, you know, from early starts to shut down China and then Europe, and then building up an entire infrastructure in rapid speed to the point where we do know we have the right tools and we are on the verge of getting a vaccine. I thought he did very well on that. Biden really was sort of baffled there. And also, I like the president nailing Biden on socialized medicine. I mean, the idea, the government option, which has been around, which was defeated during the Obama years, is the near cousin and the precursor to a complete takeover of the healthcare sector, roughly 20% of the economy, and will destroy the 180 million private insurance policies that America lives and breathes with. Yeah. I think that all became very clear. So I think
important takeaways for sure. And Larry, we're going to be talking on Monday at somewhat greater length about this. The president actually does have a health care plan, one that has been very widely embraced by doctors, and it's a free market approach. And I hope that we'll be hearing more about that in the course of the next week, especially. But let me turn to one other thing that came up. It was kind of the one excursion that was really made into the foreign policy arena, which was supposedly, as you know, the purpose of this particular debate, and apart from the Hunter Biden escapades and so on. But specifically, Joe Biden said he would make China play by the rules.
Yeah.
And you've done some heroic work, and I really want to salute you for this because I know you've been bucking a bunch of your friends up on Wall Street and doing so, but you have called out the mistake that is being made by many in the investing community putting money into China, and that's been made possible because Joe Biden negotiated, or engineered at least, a memorandum of understanding that basically allowed the Chinese not to play by our rules, let alone the international rules. Talk a little bit about what's all that it involves and what it means for America as a result.
Well, I think Mr. Biden was deliberately vague and ambiguous about that. I know he's naive, but I think that was deliberate because he does have some, at least alleged ties to China regarding family finances. But putting that aside, look, China doesn't play by the rules for anything. That's point number one. We learned that the hard way. I've learned that in the 3 years I've been in this office and over the trade negotiations. Second point is that we have to, regarding China's financial position and their companies who like to raise money here in the United States, public companies or ADRs, we have learned over several years that China is completely non-transparent, and their accounting statements are frequently quite fraudulent. But we don't know. They won't provide the necessary information. They won't provide the necessary backup papers. Now, the Public Accounting Board has been on this for years, but was never given enough strength to go forward. We gave them strength. Security advisor Robert O'Brien and I started out with the thrift savings plan.
Yes.
No Chinese companies in there unless and until they meet our regulatory standards of openness and transparency and accuracy. So the SEC and the accounting board will be on their case. We've given them a year's time. I doubt if anything's going to change. I'm doing this for two reasons. I'm doing this, number one, because I want American investors to be protected. Over 100 million Americans are in the market. But number two, I regard this as a national security issue because China's government has the power and authority to pull information of any kind from any company that is chartered in China, whether it's a government-sponsored company or not. And that means our security is compromised. So as we look at various issues, we're going to be very tough on that. That is not going to change. And Mr. Biden is exceedingly naive. And by the way, the Congress, I must say, there's a bipartisan coalition in Congress, we'll give credit where credit is due, that agrees with what President Trump is doing in China, and particularly what he's doing on national security and financial matters.
I have to say that's one of the most heartening things that I've seen in decades in this town, Larry. You've been in it or watching it for a long time as well. The lack of national security mindedness on the part of a lot of Democrats is something that has been really, since my old boss Scoop Jackson left the planet, a desperate shortcoming. And I'm so appreciative of what you're doing that is helping engender that kind of bipartisanship by providing real leadership in pushing back on the Chinese Communist Party and the danger that it poses to us. Hats off to you, to Robert O'Brien, and to the president as well. Our best. Come back to us again soon if you would, Larry. This is vital work, and we're so happy to be able to applaud it. God bless you, my friend. Next up, we're going to talk about immigration. Von Spakovsky and Christian Adams, and also the election train wreck headed our way. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and a very special welcome to our two guests for two segments on the choice and whether we're actually going to be able to make it. They're Hans von Spakovsky, one of our regulars here at Searing America, and J. Christian Adams, another of our duty experts on election integrity. We're going to talk about the 2020 election and what I'm afraid is an impending voting fraud train wreck that is headed our way. Hans is a former federal elections commissioner and senior Justice Department official. Today he's a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Edwin Meese Center. He's also the co-author of Who's Counting? How Fraudsters and Bureaucrats Put Your Vote at Risk. Christian Adams is a man who has previously served as a career attorney in the Department of Justice and is the author of Injustice, exposing the radical agenda of the Obama Justice Department, which he saw from the inside. Christian today serves as the founder and president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. Hans and Christian, thank you to you both for the contribution you make every day to securing America from, among other things, electoral fraud. It's good to have you with us.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start with what we've been hearing a lot about. I touched on it in an earlier segment with Sam Faddis, who expressed some skepticism that the focus that we're hearing a lot about, that Iran is sending emails to voters and Russia is getting access to some of the data about voter rolls in several states, is really the most serious foreign threat of intervention in and influence on our election. He points to China as a serious problem as well. Give us your take on what's been happening in these regards, gentlemen. Hans, shall we start with you?
Sure. Well, you know, it's interesting. They keep pointing to Iran and Russia when it's China that has been responsible for the largest hack and break into American governmental systems. You recall the OPM break that literally exposed the data on tens of millions of current
including
and former,
me and probably you guys too.
Yeah, yes, I got a notice about it. So it's China that has been really most active, and yet they're hardly ever mentioned. I'm more worried about that kind of hacking from the professionals in the Chinese army who are responsible for that, rather than spoof emails that Iran may be sending. I get spoof emails all the time domestically. I don't pay a lot of attention to that. I doubt American voters are going to pay a lot of attention to those either.
Yeah. Christian, your thoughts?
Well, look, part of the problem is the voter rolls are a mess, and sometimes you don't know what is a valid registration and what is a invalid registration. Frank, we did a video you got to see out in Nevada where we went to registered voters who cast ballots in the 2018 election. We went to and they were commercial addresses, and so we went to vacant lots. We went to abandoned mines. We went to casinos, pot shops, liquor stores. These were all places where people allegedly lived there, even though they didn't, and were casting ballots. That's my concern. Or dirty voter rolls allow, and don't forget, Nevada is a mail state, so all the ballots are being mailed in the Postal Service automatically to voters. Yeah, that's a real prescription for disaster.
Yeah. Where can people find that film?
At publicinterestlegal.org. It's the Nevada film.
Okay, you mentioned the mail. There have been several cases that I just wanted to catch up with you two legal beagles about, as well as most especially what seems to be a particularly portentous ruling by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He cast the deciding vote in a case involving Pennsylvania's balloting. Talk about where we are on that, Christian.
Well, look, that's just one of many cases that came out the same way, where the courts have been unwilling to intervene or do anything in these cases involving COVID changes to election law based on some sort of emergency. The theory there was that, hey, it was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that did this, not the legislature like the Constitution says. But courts have long held, going back to a case called Arizona Intertribal, that legislatures can delegate their duties. And so this was not a big surprise. In Arizona, in that case, it was a redistricting of the state legislature and congressional seats. And it's not a big surprise that the states' Supreme Courts in some places like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, some other places are giving very bad rulings that are affecting the election.
If I understand it correctly, Hans, the Supreme Court of the state of, or Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has been doing a bit of gerrymandering itself. But wasn't the effect of this ruling to extend the period of time in which those mail-in ballots could keep coming and presumably keep changing the outcome?
That's the problem. What the state Supreme Court did is they extended the deadline for the receipt of absentee ballots until well after Election Day, and that gives the possibility of manipulating results. And I think it was a big mistake for Chief Justice Roberts to side with the liberals on this, because as Christian was saying, look, the Constitution gives state legislatures the power that they can set the deadlines for absentee ballots, but the state Supreme Court can't. They don't have that power under the law. And in fact, it was the Pennsylvania legislature that appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, saying you should overturn what the state Supreme Court did. And I find it extremely disappointing that the Chief Justice didn't recognize the mistake, the constitutional error being made here, the constitutional violation, and instead went with the liberals on the court.
Well, it certainly would seem that it's not a case of delegating the authority if the legislature itself is asking the court to rule against what's been done here. So just quickly, Hans, maybe back to you. In this instance, will the effect of another abysmal Roberts ruling actually ensure that there is a very protracted delay, or at least a highly contested outcome in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, if it's a close election. I think in 2016, remember, the president won that state by only 40,000 votes. It was very close.
Very close.
So if we have tens of thousands of absentee ballots coming in after Election Day, and it's a close election, it could substantially delay knowing who won Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and perhaps the election writ large. We'll talk more about that with both Hans von Spakovsky and Christian Adams right after a short message where we're going to, I hope, learn more about how to avoid this train wreck if we can as well. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We are continuing this conversation, a very timely, very important one, with Hans von Spakovsky and Christian Adams concerning the 2020 election and whether we're actually going to have the opportunity to exercise the choice we want to make because of voting fraud or other irregularities. I wanted to come back to you quickly, Hans. When you look at the various things that are being done, and we've touched on a couple of them, of course, dirty voter rolls and a lack of accountability on the part of those who are administering them, and not least this problem of mailing ballots to who knows who and giving them plenty of time to turn them in after they figure out how many votes are needed to prevail. What else is out there that it should be particularly concerning to us in terms of other lines of attack on the integrity of our election in 2020?
Well, I think the biggest problem we may have after the election is rejected absentee ballot. Absentee ballots are rejected at a higher rate than ballots cast in person because voters make mistakes. You know, they forget to sign a ballot. They don't provide all the information required by state law. The ballot may not be postmarked or mailed by election day as required in many states. And I think what you're going to see after the election, again, if it's close, is you're going to see a litigation filed and lawyers in court basically trying to persuade judges and election officials to just waive the state rules that were set up prior to the election and just count all those rejected absentee ballots, even though they weren't valid under state law. And that'll be a way they think of being able to change election results, again, in a closed election.
Wow. Hans, any other particular lines of attack you're concerned about?
Well, I'm sorry, it's Christian. Go ahead.
Beg your pardon, Christian.
That's right. Yes. One of the things, Frank, that has happened since the spring is hundreds of millions of dollars of philanthropic money from the left has poured straight into state election offices through 501c3s called the Center for Technology and Civic Life, other organizations. And these are strategically placed flows of money into Philadelphia, Detroit, Flint, all of the predictable places where they, in fact, doubled the budget of Philadelphia's election office to move these absentee ballots to drive around the neighborhoods and knock on doors and collect ballots. It's building in structural bias into the elections. It's not happening in red counties. Yeah. And so I think that's one of the things people need to understand is this is a whole different election this year because of the involvement of hundreds of millions of dollars of left-wing philanthropy.
You know, speaking of all that money sloshing around, Christian, one of the other sources of funds, it seems, is Black Lives Matter, which has been putting money into not black communities that have had difficulties of various kinds, but they're putting money into Act Blue. Just a word on what that is and how that is operating in this environment, perhaps to skew elections as well.
Right. Act Blue is the left-wing architecture to move money into Democratic causes, Democratic campaigns. It's everywhere, though, Frank. I mean, watch an NBA game and you see all the players on the sidelines with vote T-shirts on. Right. I mean, it's structural. The entire culture is aiming toward electing Joe Biden, left-wing money. It's an amazing sight this year.
Vote seems like an innocuous thing and actually a good thing to be encouraging, but it's clearly for a purpose on the behalf of those who are wearing these outfits. Hans, one of the things that I know you're aware of, I spoke with Russ Ramsland of Allied Special Operations Group down in Dallas last week about one other piece of this that is particularly worrying. You guys were discussing, the vote integrity being somewhat better if you're actually voting in person, which I think all of us are being encouraged to do. But if the data about those balloting in-person operations is being run through servers in Barcelona, Spain, with evidently some sort of trap doors in the software that enables, at least back in 2018, votes to be massaged or adjusted, in other words, election returns to be skewed from what they actually were supposed to be. You could have that having a terrible impact on election outcomes as well, could you not, Hans?
Well, it's a thorny security question, and the issue that I don't know whether it's been answered yet or not, and that is how good is the cybersecurity of the computer networks that are used in county election headquarters to actually count the ballots? How good is that software? Is it being protected? And what kind of protections are the outside vendors that are being used by these county departments? What kind of protections are there to prevent that from happening? And I guess I think that the answer to that is that we don't have an answer. And I don't think that's been properly examined the way it should be by, for example, the Department of Homeland Security and others to tell us whether or not that's happened, whether it's a possibility of happening, and what kind of steps are being taken to make sure it doesn't happen.
Yeah. My understanding from this ASOG group, as it's called, is that it's actually past the counties. The counties are sending their data in, but somebody may be cooking the books in Barcelona. Why we would have any of our votes tabulated in some foreign country is absolutely beyond me, and I hope you're right that it is being addressed and fixed. Let me just conclude with this question to both of you, and we've got about a minute and a half. What can be done by individual Americans or by, groups or the country as a whole to try to have this come out as a truly free and fair election? Christian, start with you.
Well, first of all, this is an issue for March of an odd-numbered year, not October of an even-numbered year.
No kidding.
People need to pay attention to this 365 days a year, like we do at Public Interest Legal. I'll tell you, if you want something to do, go volunteer to work in the polls. Go volunteer to work in the polls as a worker and election official.
Great advice. Hans, to you, any last-minute recommendations?
Well, one, vote in person, unless you absolutely have to vote by mail to make sure that your vote will be put in the ballot box and counted. Second, volunteer to vote in polling places, but also this year, volunteer to be one of the individuals who is processing all those absentee ballots coming in to make sure they comply with
Talk to your
state law.
Local election officials about how you can do that. Thank you, gentlemen. Great to talk with you. We'll look forward to doing so again with updates probably post-election. And thanks to the rest of you for joining us for this edition of Securing America. I hope you feel better equipped to join us in doing just that. For more on what you can do, visit our website, securingamerica.tv. Then go forth and multiply.